Even native speakers don't always pronounce it correctly. How would you read it? Besides らしい, common dependent words that attach to the 終止形 also include these. Today, I'll walk you through the pitch accent of 終止形 when attached with these dependent words. Let's get started. Hey guys, welcome to Monochrome Japanese, a peaceful space where you can focus on your Japanese study. I'm your host, Shiho. Following the introduction episode, this is the third video on pitch accent of verbs. If you haven't watched it yet, I strongly recommend doing so before moving on. The previous two episodes on the mizenke and renyoke will also be helpful for today's study, so please check them out as well. If you remember, I previously categorized verb-dependent words into 5 types based on how they interact with conjugated forms in terms of pitch accent. And we've already learned these 4 types involved with dependent words that attach to the mizenke and renyoke. As for shushike, it involves these 2 types. This means by the end of today's video, you'll understand all of these 5 types. Now let's dive into these 2 types. First up, the follower type. You should be very familiar with it already. From the episode on dependent words of noun to the previous one on the renyoke, we've already introduced many dependent words of this type. For example, almost all particles that attach to nouns, as well as the conjunctive particle te and the auxiliary verb ta, etc. Common follower type dependent words that attach to the shushike are mainly these 3 auxiliary verbs. So, that means hearsay, mitai, and らしい. You may have noticed that each of them carries its own pitch accent nucleus on so, mi, and shi, respectively. Because they are the follower type, when they attach to a nucleus-less verb, the overall pitch falls just once. When they attach to a nucleus-bearing verb, it falls twice. Let's look at some examples. You is a nucleus-less verb, so it simply becomes 言うそう、言うみたい、言うらしい。会う is a nucleus-bearing verb, so the pitch falls twice, as in 会うそう、会うみたい、会うらしい。Of course, in natural speech, the pitch drop is not literally twice as much. Under normal speed and calm emotion, the overall pitch range tends to even out, regardless of whether the verb has a pitch accent nucleus or not. Like, 言うそう、会うそう、言うみたい、会うみたい、言うらしい、会うらしい。At this point, we should all be able to correctly read the sentence from the beginning of this video. Right. 近くにパン屋もあるらしいよ。あるらしい。In fact, some native speakers, especially younger ones, when speaking standard Japanese, tend to pronounce it as あるらしい. After watching this video, you might have an idea why. I've already introduced the hearsay so and the auxiliary verb らしい in my short series, so feel free to check them out as well. Alright, that concludes the common follower type dependent words that attach to the shushike. Next, let's move on to the loner type. So far, we've only briefly mentioned this type at the end of the previous episode on the renyoke when discussing wa. but is actually the easiest type to understand and master. Why? Because the loner type dependent words are completely unaffected by the pitch accent of preceding verbs. They always follow one pitch pattern. That's why I call them the loner type. However, is that pitch high or low? The answer is also very simple. Since they are dependent words, they cannot detach from the verb and create a high pitch by themselves. Therefore, regardless of whether the preceding verb has a nucleus or not, they are always pronounced low. Even if they have their own nucleus, they start from a low pitch. The common loner type dependent words are the frequently used conjunctive particles. Let's look at them one by one. Since no further pitch drop occurs at the joint when attaching to nucleus-bearing verbs, but that does happen with nucleus-less verbs, I'll only use the latter for demonstration. First up, kara. Just like the case particle kara that attaches to nouns, when pronounced solely, it's a pattern B word, aka atamadaka. But in a sentence, both mores share the same pitch. As a conjunctive particle, it's always low. For example, 俺がいるから大丈夫だよ。いるから。Next, the extremely common ga and the kedo group. I called it group because there are also keredo and keredomo. They do have a pitch accent nucleus when pronounced solely, but in sentences, all mores are low. Together with ga, let's look at some examples. 連絡したが返事はなかった。行けるけどちょっと遅れるよ。努力はしたけれど力不足でした。成果は出ているけれども継続が重要です。Next is the commonly used し as in 宿題も終わったし遊びに行こう。Finally, the very familiar なら When pronounced solely, as you just heard, it's also atamadaka. But when attaching to the shushike, both mores are low. For example, 買うなら今がチャンスだ。In addition to these conjunctive particles, there is also a pair of commonly used expressions that attach to the shushike, which also belongs to the loner type. でしょう and だろう. Apparently, they also have a pitch accent nucleus. However, unlike kara, the kedo group, and nara, they retain their nucleus in sentences. That said, since they usually appear at the end of a sentence, the pitch drop might not be very noticeable. For example, 今日は早く終わるでしょう。今日は早く終わるだろう。Okay, these are the common loner type dependent words that attach to the shushike. I've also covered kara, kedo, nara, でしょう and だろう in my short series, so you can take a look as well. Alright, now we've covered all the common dependent words that attach to the shushike as well as their pitch behaviors, which are the follower type, including the hearsay そう、みたい、らしい, and the loner type, including から、が、the kedo group, し、なら、でしょう, and だろう. The former are commonly used auxiliary verbs meaning hearsay or conjecture, while the latter, except for でしょう and だろう, are commonly used conjunctive particles. Therefore, mastering their pitch accents is very important. Well, you might have thought of other dependent words that attach to the dictionary form of verbs. But as in modern Japanese, the shushike and rentaike are exactly the same as the dictionary form. many of what you've thought of are likely the ones that attach to the 連体形 instead, which we'll cover in the next episode. Stay tuned. Alright, that's all for today, and I hope you enjoyed it. Oh yes, there's one more thing. About らしい. The らしい in the opening sentence is the auxiliary verb らしい, meaning conjecture. As we know, らしい can also mean essential nature, as in 今日はポカポカしていて春らしい. However, this らしい is not an auxiliary verb, but a suffix. We actually compared the two back in the episode on dependent words of noun. I've also introduced both in my short series. However, because both can attach directly to nouns, but differ in part of speech, meaning, as well as pitch accent, many learners still struggle to distinguish them. The following classic pair of examples may help. 彼はどうやら日本人らしい。彼はとても日本人らしい。The らしい in the upper example is the auxiliary verb that means conjecture, so it's the follower type. Since the word 日本人 has a nucleus, overall the pitch drops twice, as in 日本人らしい. The らしい in the lower example is the suffix that means essential nature, and it's the leader type. So the nucleus of 日本人 disappears, but the nucleus of らしい remains, as in 日本人らしい. Even if you hear native speakers pronounce あるらしい when speaking standard Japanese, don't be too surprised. After all, very few of us can speak our own native language perfectly. Alright, that's everything for today. If you found this helpful, please subscribe to my channel and share my videos with your friends who are learning Japanese. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.